when we think of fitness, we think of exercise, right? We think of the cardio, we think of running, we think of weight training, whatever it might be, hiking, being outdoors, something that you can do consistently. But often one thing that we neglect, and I am very guilty of this myself, is mobility and stretching and the component that's involved in that.
Recommended that Americans, like adults, are engaging in 150 minutes per week of moderate intensity activity or 75 minutes of vigorous physical activity, being cardio.
We won't get any benefit from any kind of stretching routine that we put in place if it's not done consistently, much like with exercise. You're not going to get a lot of benefit from, oh, I went to the gym one time 2 weeks ago. Now I went to the gym now. When we're having that inconsistent pattern, it's really hard for our body to gain any actual benefit from it, right?
They were 24% less likely than those who did not exercise to experience death from any cause, while men were 15% less likely. So almost a 10% difference between men and women, which just shows how much more important it is for females to be engaging in physical activity.
Alrighty, guys. Welcome back to the hack. I'm Trysten. This is Nikki. You guys are familiar with us. Cade is not going to be joining with us. Him and Reagan are both out of town right now, so we're going to kind of take the reins on this hack specifically. As always, if there's any questions throughout any of this, feel free to pop them into the chat. Nikki and I like when questions are asked. We can answer them as they come in or as they kind of pertain to what we're talking about. Last week, we really talked about body composition and the importance of that and what exactly that meant and how you measure it. Me and Andy had a good conversation about that. This week, Nikki and I are talking about cardio and fitness. And fitness can mean a number of different things, but we also like to hit on cardio. We know that weight training is kind of our specialty and something that we talk about a lot in clinic. But cardio is very important, and we'll kind of dive into that here right directly. But again, if there's any questions throughout any of this, feel free to ask, pop them into the chat. And we'll make sure that we see those as they come through. So, Nikki, first things first, when you think of fitness, what does fitness mean to you overall?
So I think that's a great question. Obviously, it's dependent on the person, right? And what their health goals and fitness goals pertain around. For me specifically, it's about getting stronger, increasing my lean muscle mass while also having a well-balanced approach to being healthy. So with that, I really focus on resistance training. I would say we go to the gym probably like 5 to 6 days a week, really focusing on resistance training. And then as far as cardio goes, I could always improve on that. And that's one of the goals I have set for myself, is to improve my cardiovascular health. One way that me and Trysten have been implementing that just throughout our workday is during our lunch break, we'll take what we call is a hot girl walk, where we go on the treadmill because we have a gym here in clinic, and we walk for about 30 minutes every single day. And it's just a great way to break up our day. So for me, fitness is really resistance training, cardio, also mobility. That's also part of that for me as well, but just staying healthy.
Awesome. Awesome. I think you made a good point there, is that when we think of fitness, we think of exercise, right? We think of the cardio, we think of running, we think of weight training, whatever it might be, hiking, being outdoors, something that you can do consistently. But often one thing that we neglect, and I am very guilty of this myself, is mobility and stretching and the component that's involved in that. And so one thing that I've tried to do, and again, I'm not very good at this just yet, is implementing regular stretching. Now, guys, it's really important that we have this regular stretching routine, just like it is with an exercise routine. We won't get any benefit from any kind of stretching routine that we put in place if it's not done consistently, much like with exercise. You're not going to get a lot of benefit from, oh, I went to the gym one time 2 weeks ago. Now I went to the gym now. When we're having that inconsistent pattern, it's really hard for our body to gain any actual benefit from it, right? And I see Nikki do this at the gym all the time. She actually is a lot better at implementing the stretching when I say I'm going to be stretching and I don't actually do this. Now, when it comes to stretching, what would you say, as far as the body parts are concerned, are one of the most important to maintain mobility?
That would be the posterior chain throughout those hamstrings. That's where most everyone is chronically more tight in. And that's a big area that I focus on with all of my mobility. And with every patient I work with, I stress the importance of mobility. I always provide some form of mobility program because it's extremely important just for day-to-day activity, but improving your fitness overall. It's something that we shouldn't neglect, and most people do. And as far as like guidelines go behind mobility and stretching, the physical activity guidelines state that we should be stretching 3 days a week, but with every single day of stretching being the most effective. Now, most people aren't even stretching 1 day a week, and that limits their function, their mobility, their ability to move and walk properly. So I think really focusing on the posterior chain is important, but the full body as well.
Absolutely. Now, when you say posterior chain, I think for a lot of people out there, it kind of sounds like a big fancy word. When she says posterior chain, what she means is all the muscles that go down the back side of the body, and not just the glutes and the hamstrings, but even the upper back and then the rear delts, things like that. So the posterior chain means all the muscles down the back side of the body, which are really, like she said, really important to maintain mobility in and flexibility. There is a difference between flexibility and mobility. You can be very flexible, meaning your muscles have a good amount of stretch to them, but be very immobile when it comes to the way your joints move. And so using those exercises dynamically, there are exercises out there to maintain mobility is going to be really, really important for you there.
I would definitely agree. And as far as fitness goes, mobility is really important, but there's also two other components that are extremely important and attribute to a well-rounded fitness and fitness goals for yourself. And that would be cardio, aerobic exercise, and then strength training. So starting with cardio, so the cardio component, the physical activity guidelines around that recommend that Americans, like adults, are engaging in 150 minutes per week of moderate intensity activity or 75 minutes of vigorous physical activity, being cardio. So, Trysten, if you were to explain the difference between moderate physical activity and vigorous physical activity, what would that look like?
It's a good question. So if we were to put this in terms of weight training, which is what a lot of you have done here in the clinic, we like to use a scale called an RP, or a rate of perceived exertion, right? And this is a relative scale used by the individual because everyone has a different perceived rate of exertion. So if we're going moderate, right, we're right around that, probably that 6 to 7, 5 to 6 range, 5 to 7 range, somewhere in there where, yes, you have a couple reps left. It's not all out. It's not going to be 1 to 2 reps within failure, but you are strained, right? The heart rate is elevated. You feel it beating. And then the vigorous activity is going to be anything well beyond that. We're going to the failure. If it's in the cardiorespiratory, exercises, you do feel like, okay, I can do this for maybe 10 minutes before I need to take a rest, right? It's not something that you feel you could sustain for a long period of time. But I like to put it in as simple terms as I possibly can without putting, measurements or heart rates on it and go by how many reps do I have left in the tank? And that's kind of where the moderate to vigorous activity level lies.
I think that was very well said. And as far as resistance training, that was perfect. And then on the cardio side of things, if you were to think about it, just easy terms to understand, moderate is you're raising your heart rate, you're able to break a sweat, but you're able to hold a conversation. Whereas vigorous, you're able to get a couple words out, but you can't hold a full conversation and form a full sentence because you're out of breath, your heart's racing, you're either jogging, sprinting, something of that form. So if you think about that for both cardio and resistance training, it'll help you understand if you're hitting moderate or if you're hitting vigorous. So then moving into strength training, the physical activity recommendations are that we're engaging in strength training 2 days a week. So for me and Trysten, we really prioritize resistance training and we're getting well past the 2 days a week, but we could both probably work on hitting that 150 minutes a week of moderate intensity or 75 minutes of vigorous when it comes to cardio. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely. And within that, guys, remember that when we strength train, it's really important to always have that progressive overload component, right? We're doing, let's say we're hitting the bare minimum. We're doing 2 days per week. Fantastic. Within those 2 weeks, remember that the body wants to stay, and we talked about this a little bit last time, even with the body composition. It wants to stay in what's called homeostasis. The body wants to stay as normal, we'll call it normal as possible. It doesn't want to be strained. It wants to burn the least amount of calories possible. That's what we're kind of designed to do, right? And from an evolutionary standpoint, that makes sense. But we always want to be providing stimulus to the body so that we can constantly be improving. So if we're training 2 times per week, you need to be improving in some degree from week to week. Now, when I say improve, a lot of people simply think, oh, can just add more weight. I'm just adding more weight, right? Well, if that were true and I could just indefinitely add weight, I would be benching 1,000 pounds by now, right? But I'm not, because there are limitations in place. There's different variables that we can manipulate, and always one at a time. We never manipulate a bunch of variables at one time, because then we never know what worked and what didn't. We can manipulate your rest times. We can manipulate the sets that you're doing. We can manipulate the weight that you're doing, or even the frequency at which you're lifting. You see that there's different ways for me to overload or to get better from week to week. It doesn't have to always be just add more weight, because then our risk of injury also directly increases as well.
Yeah, and some of those variables that we're looking at when we are implementing what's known as progressive overload could be increasing sets or decreasing sets, increasing reps, decreasing reps, manipulating the rest time, how long you're resting between sets. So if you were to decrease that rest time, then you're going to be pushing a little bit closer to failure depending on the sets, reps. And then also the biggest one that people tend to think about is adjusting the weight, which, like Trysten said, if you could always increase your weight, you'd be lifting like Superman, but that's not the case. So manipulating those other variables becomes increasingly important.
Awesome. Now, Nikki, we've talked a lot about, general recommendations, general guidelines. This is what you generally should be doing. But there are some nuances and some difference between males and females, and the recommendations for those, right? Can you talk a little bit about, why they might be different? And there's even a recent study that came to light that kind of highlighted the differences between the importance for males and females.
Yeah, so there was recently a study, I think it was published in February, so about a month ago, and it highlighted some key differences between males and females that I think are really important to note. So within this study, there was over 400,000 adults ages anywhere from 27 to 61, and they studied them for over 2 decades, so plenty of time to get plenty of participants and lots of data. And within this study, they found that moderate aerobic physical activity, so cardio at that moderate pace where you're able to hold a conversation, it reduced the risk for death in both men and women, but more increasingly for females. So they found that females were able to reduce their risk for death, stroke, cardiovascular disease at a greater rate than men were, despite the time that they were engaging in this physical activity. And one of the key components from this study that I took away was the time that it took to plateau. So the time in which they were engaging in physical activity each week, in which the reduced risk of death and disease, all these premature death, plateaued at about 300 minutes per week of moderate activity, so about 5 hours. And that's a lot for a lot of people. That's a big time commitment, but this is where it plateaued, not necessarily where they saw the greatest increased reduction in risk. So when we're looking at some of the key breakdowns from the study, they found that women who engaged in regular moderate aerobic activity, so that moderate cardio activity, they were 24% less likely than those who did not exercise to experience death from any cause, while men were 15% less likely. So almost a 10% difference between men and women, which just shows how much more important it is for females to be engaging in physical activity. And within this study, they looked at both cardio and resistance training, which I think is really, really interesting, because they found that women and men who participated in resistance training had a 19% reduction in risk for death as far as women go. And then in the men, there was an 11% decrease in the risk for death. So both aspects, looking from cardio and resistance training, women had greater results as far as improving their life, improving their longevity when engaging in regular cardio activity and resistance training. So I just think this is such a cool study that recently came out that just highlighted the benefits of regular physical activity in both men and women, but significantly more in women.
Well said. I mean, she really summed up that study overall way better than I could have. And it really highlights that yes, the physiological systems and how the body operates and how we adapt to exercise, there are similarities, but males and females really are so different and do require different things. We know that males, for example, weight training, we gain more muscle. Naturally, that's the way our body works, right? Females are still able to gain muscle, but not quite to the same degree that males are, just given our genetics and the way that our bodies operate. We see from this study that females get a far better increase in what we call all-cause mortality, or dying for any reason, than males do. Now, that doesn't take into account that men are probably just dumber than females and die for any given reason because of that. But it's really cool to see how side by side they really are totally different. Now, one thing that you hit on regularly throughout that was regular physical activity, right? And that's one thing that a lot of you have talked about with me and with Nikki, and that we've tried to push on. You've come into the clinic multiple times to work out with us. Our jobs as the fitness advisors here are to help you, whether you do what we say or not, find something that you're able to do consistently and to replicate over time. Because in reality, it's not going to do you much good to exercise one time here and one time here and one time here. It may in the moment make you feel good, but exercise, much like, with investments, is a compounding effect. Over time, we adapt, we get better, we get stronger. And so in order for that to happen, we have to be doing something that consistently gets us there. We know that weight training, which is one of my favorite things to do, one of Nikki's favorite things to do, may not always be something that you love to do, but there are other ways that we can incorporate resistance training, and it doesn't always have to be a dumbbell or a bar or a kettlebell, to make sure that you are going to continue to get better.
And I think what's really important about what you said with surrounding regular physical activity and this study, it just shows that even a small amount of regular physical activity a week is increasingly more beneficial than sitting at home and living a sedentary lifestyle and not engaging in any form of physical activity. And this study just really emphasized that point, that there's no singular approach to physical activity and how much time you're dedicating to strength training, to cardio, to stretching. It's got to be a well-rounded approach, but it's got to be centered around your goals, what you enjoy doing, what you're looking to improve, your age, your health status, the schedule, the amount of time that you're able to engage in this physical activity. But the value that comes from regularly engaging it is, the science shows that it's beneficial and that everyone should be doing it, despite what you may think about exercise or how you may feel about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Very well said. And on this topic of fitness, right? We've talked about cardio, we've talked about resistance training, we've even talked about flexibility and mobility. There are other factors that are needed to be discussed, I think, when it comes to fitness, because fitness really is a very general umbrella term that a lot of these things fall under. One of those things being, recovery and the importance of recovery. Now, when I say recovery, and this has happened in the past, a lot of people that I've worked with in the past, even, they tend to take this term recovery and they kind of run with it. And they go, oh, I'm overtrained, I need to recover. And then they don't do anything at all. And they use that as an excuse to not do anything, because in reality, exercise can be hard. Exercise is uncomfortable. I often tell a lot of patients that I work with that, exercise is simply, as a whole, becoming okay or becoming comfortable with the idea of being uncomfortable. And that's totally okay and very, very good for us. However, recovery is very important. Recovery is a number of different things working together, right? We do have the time that we spend away from the gym. We know that you're not getting bigger. The muscles aren't getting bigger. We're not getting stronger when we're in the gym. We're actually doing damage. We're tearing things down. It's the time that we spend away and how we spend that time that makes up the difference as to how adequately we recover. Now, the peptides and things like that you guys have helped or have taken, the CJC1295, the ipamorelin, those kinds of things are really, really good. The thymosin beta-4 at recovery, at helping your body bounce back from these strenuous activities. However, sleep is massively important. Now, Nikki, would you say that you get pretty good sleep regularly, or is it something that you yourself could work on if you had to?
So I'm only 23, so I'm very young. I've been blessed in the fact that I do sleep very well. I don't really have a problem with sleep necessarily, but that's not to say that I couldn't improve. There's several nights where I'm waking up several times throughout the night or not able to fall asleep. So I would say it's something I could improve on, but not necessarily something I struggle with.
For sure. And that may be different for a lot of people watching this, or even people that we work with. Sleep may be something that you struggle with. It's really important because, we look at like college level athletes and athletes in general. A really cool comparison that I was given a couple of years ago that kind of stuck with me was that if we were to, as in athletics, there's a whole list of banned substances that if they're caught taking, they cannot perform and they cannot participate because it's considered performance enhancing, right? Now, if we were to take the benefits of sleep and deep sleep and REM sleep and put it into a pill form and give it to that athlete, that would be a banned substance. They would not be allowed to participate because it's that important, and the importance of good sleep can be that performance enhancing, right? It's that important. Now, if we step next to that, we would go nutrition and the importance of bringing in more protein. We talked to a lot of you guys about this. I've talked with Kate about this and the importance of protein, but protein really at its core is the building block of muscle. All the damage that we do in the gym with the weights and even walking and things like that, those muscles are repaired with protein, with amino acid chains that are the building blocks of said protein. And without adequate protein intake, it's almost like beating your head against a wall here, where you're going into the gym, you're working hard, you're tearing things down, but then your body can't build things back up because it doesn't have the adequate tools at its disposal to do so, which is why we often recommend such a high protein intake for a lot of our clients, being, that 0.8 to 1.0 grams per pound of body weight. And then the last thing that I really like to point out is the management of stress, right? Stress is something that not a lot of people really consider when it comes to, recovery overall. Now, stress is directly related to cortisol. We know that cortisol is the stress hormone. And this is where, when we see cortisol spikes, it can have a direct implication on your body's ability to recover from not only exercise, but anything else that kind of goes on in your life. And so this is where working with your health coach is super beneficial, is because when they're trained in ways to help you manage the stress, keep the stress levels low, keep the cortisol levels low, obviously through, supplementation and even peptides, but allow your body to maintain those lower levels of cortisol, because when they're chronically high, we're stuck in that chronic state of fight or flight. Our body can't recover, even if our nutrition and our sleep are in tune there. Nikki, would you say that you have quite a few stress management techniques in place that you use regularly?
I can't say that I do. That's something that I could definitely improve on, and it would help me with recovery and just overall health and well-being. And I know our health coach that we do have here in clinic, Andy, me and her have been working on a few things. She's learning some new techniques with self-hypnosis. So if you have the privilege of working with Andy, definitely ask her about that, and ask her for some key tips and pointers as far as managing stress and just living a well-rounded, healthy life, for sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, guys, we covered quite a bit here today. Again, if there's any questions, as we wrap things up here, feel free to pop them into the chat. I would like to issue a bit of a challenge here, going forward into this next week. We talked about body composition last week. We've talked about cardio and fitness this week. The challenge I'd like to issue is I would love to see all of you guys, to some degree, do some form of consistent exercise for a 10-minute window. So that can be weight training, that can be cardiovascular training. And when I say training, just activity. You could be walking, something that you can maintain for 10 consecutive minutes without a break or a rest in between. It's okay. Like I said, it's okay to be uncomfortable. Exercise is supposed to be. If you are comfortable, odds are that you're able to push a little bit harder than what you would think. So going into this next week, we would love to see you guys be able to consistently exercise for about 10 minutes.
Yeah, I think that's a great challenge to issue. How many days a week are you wanting that? Are you wanting that one day this week, 3 days this week?
I would like to see, let's go 3 days this week. Let's be a little ambitious. Let's push the envelope here a little bit. That's definitely what I like to do here at EastWest, is push my clients a little farther than what they think they might be able to do. So let's go 3 days a week. Let's do 10 minutes of consistent, without a break exercise. Now, Hugh, I see you asked a question here real quickly in the chat regarding the study. Why do men historically have a shorter lifespan compared to women? Now, I think there's a number of different factors that go into this. One being different physiology. It's actually kind of interesting that, you see these bodybuilders and things like that larger amounts of, like, we know that larger amounts of muscle mass often correlate to longer life. But there is a certain tipping point where if you get too much muscle, right? If you're too big, which this isn't a problem for a lot of people in the general population, but you get too big, the heart works harder and is put under a lot more stress, and therefore can result in higher cardiovascular risks and things like that. Now, I do also think there's a bit of a component when you look at the lifespan overall. It's not just physiology. I do think that men take bigger risks, make poor decisions, really, for that matter, when it comes to, adrenaline seeking and all these different kind of things that men are just kind of more inclined to be drawn to. We see it as young boys, we're always jumping off of something, things like that, that carries into adulthood. Women tend to just make smarter decisions overall, if I'm being honest with you, which I think plays into the overall lifespan when they look at lifespan as a whole. Because you're right, women historically do live longer than men, but I think there's many other factors well beyond even exercise or physiology that play into that.
I think that was really well said. Men are a little bit more dumb, as you want to put it, just in layman's terms, than females. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, guys, again, if there's other questions, we always love hopping on these things. If there's any questions, you can always reach out to me or Nikki directly. It's just our first name at ACU EastWest. And if we can help you with anything, if we can't, we'll put you in touch with someone that we can. Men are stupid. I agree 100%. Hugh gets it. So again, great chatting with you guys. And we look forward to being on these in the future.
And as far as this study goes, I'll be posting it on our social medias if you want to read it and take a deeper dive into it, just because it was a big talking point that we touched on today. So just be looking out on our socials for this study.
Awesome. All righty, guys, we will see you next week. Remember that challenge. And yeah, have a good night.
See ya.